Our main speaker today is Chris Riley, who is the COO of Evolution Labs. He can do a much better job introducing what Evolution Labs is and who he is, so I'll let him get to that shortly. But before he gets going, there's just a couple things that I thought were kind of interesting about his company. That there's these parallels between how his company runs and how Zoho runs. So this is a screenshot of an article which was written by Sridhar Vembu, who is Zoho's CEO, and he's actually talking about how he thinks a big thing that can happen in the future is rural revitalization, because with all of this great technology that allows us to communicate with people everywhere, companies can work remotely much more easily than in the past. And so any place that has a decent Wi-Fi connection, you can actually work from. So one kind of interesting tidbit about this is that Sridhar used to work out of Pleasanton, California, which is where Zoho has one of its US offices, and I used to sit right near him. But like right before the pandemic, he actually moved, and now he is staying in rural India in like this super remote village that's like hours from the nearest airport by driving. And that airport also I've been to, it's only like one room. So it's very remote. And yet he's able to manage running this company that has like 9,000 people remotely, which is pretty cool. So today we're going to hear all about how Evolution Labs has found success as a remote from day one company. We're also going to hear about Chris Riley's perspective as COO. So I'm just going to go ahead and switch over control here. And then just so you guys know, at the end of this, we're going to have Q&A. So you can ask questions all throughout it. Victoria will be answering some of the Zoho related questions throughout the session, but then you can also ask questions for Chris, and then I'll choose the best ones and I'll just kind of like interview him once he finishes with his presentation.
Let me just kind of start by introducing you to Evolution Labs. So we are an education technology company based in the United States. We sell to both K-12 and higher ed. We're a pretty small company, about 14 full-time employees, and then dozens of freelancers. And that's going to come in key when we talk about kind of how we work in general. As far as the reach, we're in, we'll talk about the numbers, but over 2,000 schools, districts, and or universities. And our main product is our social emotional learning curriculum and the platform that delivers it. That's for K-12. And then there's a separate recruitment engagement platform for higher ed. Suite 360 is that K-12 social emotional learning product. And it really started at the higher education level. So we were working with all sorts of different universities in their athletics departments, in their counseling departments. And what we kind of consistently took away is that students were not prepared for higher education. And it wasn't because they didn't get the academic instruction that they needed. It was because of all the other issues, study skills, work habits, those kinds of soft skills that you might refer to in the business world. And so we built this K through 12 platform to try to address that issue. So in Suite 360 was born. It's expanded over the years. It started with kind of a whole group program called Suite 360 Students for everybody. And then we looped in individuals as we needed to. So Suite 360 Intervention was for those students who needed a little bit more instruction. Suite 360 Parent was to bring parents and guardians into the conversation. Suite 360 Staff was to bring all of the staff members at the school into the conversation. And our latest product, Suite 360 Mental Health and Prevention, was all about addressing the rising mental health crisis in today's youth, as well as child trafficking and substance abuse. So that's kind of a background of our major product and what we do. As far as how it actually works, we create the content and then we display it to students. I mean, that's in a nutshell, that's what we do. And I always like to call Suite 360 kind of our accidental product. And it's an interesting story where we started in higher ed. And you'll see just 4 years ago, 2016, yellow is the Suite 360. And over time, we found that that's where the market really took us. And that's where, as we brought more and more people, that's where our passion kind of developed, is with that product. Suite 360 by the numbers, just to give you guys an idea, 2,000 plus schools in 47 states, over 1 million students have gone through our courses over the last 5 years. If you are involved in education in Montana, Wyoming, or North Dakota, please contact us. We're coming for you. We need to round it out and get to all 50 states. So let me just introduce myself for a second. I'll start with who I am. Husband for 11 years, father of 3, 2 humans and a puppy. I'm in the Army Reserves. I'm a healthcare administration officer, so I do that part-time. I also enjoy coaching youth football, not this year because of COVID, but before. And I'm an avid football fan. Go Saints. I'm also and let me caveat that, American football, avid football fan. What I do is the Chief Operating Officer at Evolution Labs. So as far as kind of what that means, and there's a lot of different ways that COOs are used in the business world, I've come to realize. It could be anything from the head of sales to the head of product development. There's all sorts of different ways that people utilize a COO. Typically, what seems to be a consistent theme is the COO is kind of the right-hand person to the CEO, the executor of the CEO's vision, if you will. So that's kind of what my role looks like. I manage the day-to-day operations of the business. My goal is to make the vision a reality. So I'm not necessarily the guy who comes up with all the ideas. I'm the guy who comes up with the ideas to make the big ideas work. I absolutely love my job, my role, because I get to be involved in all the aspects of the business. So I call it having my hands in all the different cookie jars. So I've got the product side, the content side, the client services, marketing, implementation, everything. I get to touch all sorts of different operations, which means I get to talk to all the smart people who actually do the jobs in each of those sections of the business on a day-to-day basis. And as more and more careers have turned into these specialized roles, become an expert, have kind of your one specialty. I've really enjoyed making my career out of being the ultimate generalist. So I'm not a programmer, but I'll do a little coding. I'm not a marketer, but I'll write a marketing email. I'm not a client services representative, but I'll do a presentation. I just like being involved in all of those different aspects. I'm not the best at any of them, but I'm passable at all. So to kind of give you a visual explanation of what we do, sales, what I do, sales, content development, product development, client services. And there's me in the middle. That's an actual image of me, just with a little more hair. Now, what we really wanted to talk about, now that I've kind of introduced myself and the company, is working from home. And the way I see working from home is really, there's a combination of pros and cons. So we'll talk about the pros first. Opportunities are really limitless when we're talking about working from home. So I'll just kind of talk through our journey from the very beginning of our company. Our CEO, his name is Peter Kraft, decided that we would build this business differently. So, this is about 6 years ago when it started. And from the beginning, we decided that remote was the way to go. It was the wave of the future. So first pro, the real estate costs are like nothing. Our office is, or our home office is a couple of rooms and a mailbox. I mean, and so, as far as real estate licensing goes, that is not even a budget line item. It doesn't even cross the threshold. I think we pay more for our telephone communication than we pay for our real estate. The other pro that we've really embraced is that we get to hire the most talented people regardless of where they are. So if you've ever had the privilege of putting out an ad and restricting it by location, you notice that your available talent pool shrinks by like 99%. So we felt like the best way to do this was to find the best people regardless of where they live. And we really built a business model around that. So I mentioned the freelancers. Our content is created by experts in their field, but we don't have many of those experts on staff. Instead, we go and get, we find a psychology professor, or a former classroom teacher who implemented a social emotional learning program, or a former school administrator to write staff development lessons. And we bring them in this very flexible environment. So it really makes it a win-win. They come in, it's almost like the Uberization of textbooks. And that's what we've done with our company, and allows us to really get a really broad base of content without having hundreds of people on staff who are the experts on that in that field. Of course, another pro for working from home is the work-life balance. So our philosophy from day one has been that having that balance is critical. And when you work from home, you really can make that a reality. So I can be on a webinar with a client, and then as soon as that webinar is done, I can go help my son with his homework, or I can unload the groceries to help my wife out. We can really balance all these different competing priorities a lot better when we work from home. And you can't beat the commute. I live in Southern California, so just getting on the freeway could be a chore and as a job in and of itself. And so with working from home, you really can decide to live and work anywhere. I think Dylan kind of brought that up right from the beginning. It doesn't matter where you live because you can't beat that commute. One of the kind of, I think, underappreciated benefits of working from home, I think some of these other ones are pretty widely accepted, but one that I would say is really kind of near and dear to my heart is that trust is built into the work relationship out of necessity. So there's a whole lot of micromanaging, there's a whole lot of bad leadership out in the world, in the corporate world. And working from home almost forces you to let go of those bad leadership philosophies, because trust is built into the work relationship. I cannot physically look over the shoulder of any of the people who work for me, because we're all in different parts of the country. I think it's a beautiful way to kind of build those relationships right from the beginning. Of course, there are some challenges too. So the biggest challenge I would say with working from home is it's very difficult to build strong working relationships, because you can't just turn around in your chair and see your coworker. It's hard to generate those spontaneous conversations that might occur. We call it, the water cooler talk. The other really big drawback with working from home is that if you don't have trust, then it's impossible to maintain a good working relationship. So, if we have somebody who breaks that trust in a meaningful way, there's no recourse, really. I mean, it's you have to separate. So that that's one of those sad truths about working from home. While it's awesome that it's built on trust, the second that trust is lost, it's impossible to work with that person. And then the last one is kind of, it's not necessarily a con, but it is something that you have to keep in mind. and that is communication has to be deliberate. It doesn't just happen. Like I mentioned, you can't just turn around and have a conversation about, hey, what did you do last weekend, or did you see the game on Sunday, or how's your kids, like those kinds of relationship building. Those are the building blocks of relationships, and they don't just happen remotely. You have to kind of plan for where and when and how those happen. So transition tips. I picked this image deliberately because I look at kind of the old model of trading hours for dollars as a little bit archaic. So similar to this black and white folder or black and white picture. So my first tip for transitioning to work from home, and I know that there's a lot of companies out there who are being forced into this transition because of the pandemic. My advice is to embrace it. Embrace it fully, 100%, lean into it. Be intentional about communication. So this is a theme that will run through, everything that we talk about. Be intentional about communication. It's not just going to happen like it might happen in an office environment. And along those same lines, use the right tool for the right conversation. So we have a variety of communication options, particularly with Zoho One. We've got Click for chat. We've got, the calling feature within Click. We also have, for us at Evolution Labs, we also have each other's cell phones. We can pick up the phone. Webinars. So, what we're doing right now is, a webinar-based training or conversation and email. And basically, we've kind of established ground rules for what communication type is appropriate for which medium. So chat, that's going to be something where we're talking back and forth, and we're, the kind of transactional day-to-day conversations. Call, that's when we're trying to hash something out, and it's a lot faster to just have a conversation than to go back and forth for half an hour chatting. A webinar is for when we're trying to train somebody, show somebody how to do something. The screen sharing, all of that kind of comes into the webinar. And then of course, email is largely restricted for client communication, as well as, kind of the tasks, the day-to-day tasks that need to be done. So, hey, I need you to run up this report, or this client is asking for XYZ. That's what we reserve email for. My biggest piece of advice, though, is don't try to take your old ways of doing business into remote work. So the whole mentality of punching a clock, having your 15-minute breaks and your half an hour lunch, and all of that kind of, I still call it archaic structure. Don't bother with that unless you have to. There are some instances in businesses that I understand that you might need to run shifts for, say, a call center, and that makes sense to have the punch in, punch out, so we're all on the same page as who's on the phone, who's active. But for the vast majority of kind of the professional work that works from home, we can dispense with that. I don't need to know necessarily whether one of my team members is on their lunch break. I'm not trading, I'm not having them trade their hours for dollars. I'm paying them for what they accomplish. And so it becomes a very results driven environment versus a time driven environment. So don't try to take your old ways into remote work, is my biggest tip. Now, attributes that made me successful as a COO. Really, to put it succinctly, other people is what made me successful as a COO. But one of the things that I noticed that I was able to do is be the trailblazer. So I might nerdy little Star Trek poster there, but if there was something new that needed to be done, that's what I would do. I would jump in and I would do that myself. I would figure out the way to do that so that other people could come behind me and either follow that or even better, refine it and make it better. The second thing is find, hire, and rely on great people. There's been numerous articles about those first two. Find and hire great people. But the third one, rely on great people, is one that I feel like a lot of leaders forget to do. We think we need to do it all, and that's kind of a theme that I'll talk about when I get into some of the advice. The last thing is to leverage technology. So I mentioned that we have a team of 14 full-time employees servicing 2,000 plus schools across the country. That's impossible to do without good technology systems behind the scenes. As far as the challenges of being a small business COO, we did not go the Silicon Valley route, if you will. You know, you read the news about all these tech startups and hey, we just launched our Series A and our Series B, and they're all about fundraising and investments. We decided that we wanted to grow organically. And so everything that we did was revenue based. We took a few minor investments because we needed to, but we didn't take, millions of dollars in Series A or Series B funding. And the reason there's a couple of reasons for that. First, we get to keep control. But the second is that we really would stretch ourselves to the limit before we spent money. And that was, that forces the company culture to be very mindful of, do we really need that extra thing? Or do we really need that extra person in the seat? And if the answer is, well, maybe not, then we can find other ways to leverage technology to change processes to make ourselves even more efficient. So that's kind of the approach we took. But that brought challenges, and that is, we're dealing with limited resources. I can't just, if I get too busy, I can't just hire somebody and add somebody else to the payroll. I got to find other ways and be creative. The second challenge that, at least for me, was giving people the context they need. So I feel like sometimes as business leaders, we have conversations with, I mentioned, I get my hands in all the different cookie jars. So when I'm talking to, say, our content team, I don't always necessarily realize that they didn't have the conversation I had 2 hours ago with our technology team, our development team, versus our client services team. And so bringing in all that context into communication was a real challenge for me, at least in the initial stages. I feel like I've gotten a little bit better at it, but that's been a challenge for me, and it's something to keep cognizant. And I was really frustrated several times when I would ask somebody to accomplish something, and then I would turn around, a couple of days later, they'd say, "Hey, I got it done," and it wasn't anything like what I wanted it to be. And the reason is they didn't have the context that I had. And so I was asking them to read my mind. That doesn't work. The last thing is culture is critical. That's kind of the business buzzword, right? Culture, what's your company culture? But the reality is it's true. And as the COO, you're kind of the steward of the company culture. And so making sure that you have the right people with the right values in the right seats is critical. So now advice. The biggest piece of advice is to hire people who can do pieces of your job better than you can. And what I refer to is actively work to be obsolete. If somebody on my team needs me to do something, then I haven't trained them. I haven't given them the tools that they need to do their job most effectively. So it's all about finding people who are better than you to do different pieces of the job. And I actually learned that from our CEO. When I was first hired, he would introduce me on calls as the expert. When he was the boss. So I kind of transitioned that to my own leadership style. That I look to find people who are the experts and let them do their jobs. The other thing is to share your toys. So I put up a nice little picture of some kids playing with blocks. And I have 4 siblings that I grew up with. And I learned really early on that being the master planner of whatever game we're building or whatever we're trying to do has its pros, but it also has its cons because I'm limited. So if I give away my set of Legos, then somebody might build something different than I would, but it could actually end up being better. And so share your toys. And when I translate that to business, what I'm talking about is that piece that you do that you're just not sure somebody else could do it as well. So whether that's project management, whether that's marketing, whether that's sales presentations, whatever it is, find that thing that you're like, oh, I don't want to give away my Legos, um, and share your toys. And then, of course, don't forget to communicate and be deliberate about that communication. So I'm going to pause there for a second, and that's kind of the remote work and COO portion before I get into Zoho. See if there are maybe any questions or comments. I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah, guys, now would be a good time if you had any questions on that first section. But I've actually got a question for you, Chris. So you said that I remember in an earlier conversation with me that your company had been growing exponentially, and that can cause a lot of changes in a company to grow so rapidly. So, as a COO, how have you kind of dealt with that? Has there been growing pains? What have been some of the big challenges there?
The short answer is yes. So anybody who's ever been interviewed by me will attest to the fact that I always start the conversation by saying we are in the awkward teenager phase of growth. Um, so we're not toddlers, not running around like running into walls, but we're also too gangly for our own good. And so there's lots of growing pains that come in, and most of it has to do with figuring out how to adjust your processes. So the first, when I'm thinking about 5 years ago when we first came on, every client program was custom built. We would sit down with a client for an hour and we would go over all their requirements. We would go back to the tech team. We would custom build their particular program the way they wanted it. And the client services team was very hands on. We would assign every lesson to every student. We would manage their communications. Obviously, when you go from 26 schools to 2,000 schools, that model doesn't work anymore. So we had to adjust our technology to accommodate kind of self-service. We also had to adjust our client services to be more of a training and guiding team rather than an implementation team and a project management team. So there's lots of different growing pains along the way, and it really is dictated by your situation. But one of the benefits for us with with growing the way that we were is we didn't just jump to the easy, expensive solution because we didn't have the funds to do so. So it took a lot of collaborative effort to find creative solutions on how we were going to do each step of that process.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. One other thing that I was wondering is you guys have been working remote from day one, and you said the great thing about that is that you can hire talent from wherever, which is awesome. But I think maybe for people that are kind of new to this, the question they might have is, how do I know when I'm interviewing somebody over a video call or whatever? How can I judge whether they will be a good fit for working remotely? If I'm used to always working at a business where, I meet someone in person, I'm evaluating them in person. Is there anything you've learned about how to navigate that?
Um, I would say it's actually pretty similar. So I ran a call center before this position where I would hire people all the time, and most of the time you become, if you're in the business of hiring people, you get pretty good at gauging kind of their personality. I would say there's not really a hard and fast rule. What I would look at most when I would evaluate a potential hire was that cultural fit. So somebody that seemed like they were excited, like they were positive. Um, but like I mentioned, one of the cons is that trust issue. So I remember we were hiring for a development position, and this guy, um, he showed up like 15 minutes late onto our initial webinar. At that moment, you're done, man. So we're no longer going to, if you can't manage your own time to be on time to a job interview, then I can't trust you to manage your own time working remotely. So it's those little things that you'd pick up on as you're going through that process that can be deal breakers that maybe you might let slide a little bit if you were in person.
All right. Yeah, good advice. Um, so do you want to go ahead and continue on with the section about how you guys went about finding Zoho and implementing Zoho, and then maybe we can do some more questions after that?
Sure. So let's talk about Zoho. This transition happened for us about 3.5 years ago, the spring of 2017. And really what drove it, and this is kind of a theme, like we didn't have tons of investment money. So basically we had 10 different employees sharing 3 Salesforce licenses because they were so expensive that we couldn't justify adding more licenses so that every user had their own. And I figured there had to be a better way. So I went out and I Googled Salesforce competitors, and Zoho had just launched the Zoho One suite. And so it was kind of a serendipitous timing where, there was lots of press releases out, and I was like, hey, what is this? And we immediately saw, when getting into Zoho One, how it could replace several other software we were using. To have the list there at the bottom, CRM obviously replaces Salesforce. Projects replaced Basecamp. Desk replaced Zendesk. Click replaced Slack. Sprints replaced Jira. So, I mean, it was really just a cascade that we're like, hey, we could bring everything under this one umbrella, get rid of all of these other platforms that don't even talk to each other, and really pull it into one unified platform. And for us, that made tons of sense because up until that point, I was managing the Zapier processes, like hundreds of Zapier processes, trying to connect Basecamp to Salesforce to Slack, and it was just a nightmare. So bringing it all into one uniform platform was really beneficial. As far as how we transitioned, the first thing that we did was we got everybody onto a unified platform, and then we focused on CRM and automation. So since that was our big need, as I mentioned, we needed to leverage our technology in order to have our limited amount of employees managing all these different relationships. Particularly at 2017 was right at the beginning of that steep growth curve. So we had gone from 26 schools in 2016 to 145 in 2017, and we were just drowning, and we had no way of keeping all of those straight. And at that point, we were generating more sales excitement than we could keep up with. So we really needed to automate what we were doing. So bringing everybody onto a platform so that we could assign tasks to people, we can manage logins, and then automation. So here's a little image of one of our blueprints for our client journey. Every one of these steps is an email is going out, a task is being assigned, a piece of CRM. One of the difficulties that we had with Salesforce is that there was so much inconsistency with who was recording what information that we couldn't use it as a tool. So using Zoho's blueprint ability to kind of force different fields to be filled out before you can move on to different processes, we really just mapped out the entire system to make it easier on everybody. As far as advice for how to do this, so if you're considering Zoho One, I would say the biggest thing that has been beneficial to me is having everything under that unified umbrella, as well as the flexibility. So regardless of the software could be the best software in the world, could be life-changing, it could be amazing, but software adoption is hard because change is hard. And so really planning your integration, planning your change is critical. And part of that is attitude. If you're not excited, then as the person who's driving the change in software, they're not going to be excited. Nobody else is going to be excited. So when we first transitioned, I became the biggest Zoho cheerleader that you've ever heard, maybe aside from Dylan. But it's Zoho this, Zoho that. I'm sure my team got sick and tired of me talking about Zoho, but that was intentional because that was what, if I was excited a lot, then I could maybe hope that they would get excited a little, enough to get over that initial change. And then once you're in and you've set things up, then it becomes just standard business practice. The other thing is to commit. So, and you don't have to commit to the whole Zoho One suite from the get-go. I mean, we started with CRM and Click. Those were our kind of two main things. And then we gradually moved into projects. Then we gradually moved into Desk, all the other pieces that we implemented one by one. But you need to commit to, this is what we're doing, and not just try it out for a couple of weeks and then find out the change is hard and then back off. As far as if you're leading that transition, dedicate the time to become proficient. So I am by no means a Zoho expert, but I've spent the time to where if anybody on the team needs help or has a question, I can usually get the answer, or I can lean on the Zoho implementation teams to get that answer for me. And then finally, fit your processes. And I have an example here that I want to show. And that is, we work with schools. That's our primary customer. And Zoho default is not set up to work with schools because it's set to work with kind of more generalized industry or more generalized businesses. So we had to customize it. But the beautiful thing about it is that it's so easy to do. We were able to do so. And here's just a view of what one of our pages in our accounts look like, so we can keep track of that kind of information that's relevant to us. This is completely customized to fit our processes. As far as, I just want to kind of give a couple of other examples of what that looks like from a process customization standpoint. So this is the process we use to do, we created about 125 different 15-minute lessons over the course of 6 months with our content team and projects. We created a brand new assessment and scoring mechanism for social emotional learning using analytics. So all of these things, all these tools can be utilized in so many different ways, but it's really about fitting Zoho into your processes. So now we'll talk about a little bit about results. The first result that I would say that I noticed right off the bat was having Zoho One as kind of your business operating system, if you will, is it saves a lot of time evaluating different software. I mean, basically, we look at a software. If it does not integrate with Zoho, then we don't even go down that path. And then not only that, but Zoho integrations, when you look at the integrations, they'll suggest software to use. So we didn't have a telephony system. So we found a system through Zoho CRM suggested one. We got it set up and running within a day. Zoho Analytics saves 3 to 5 hours per month of reporting work because I'm pulling reports from all these various systems into one central repository. I can look at our CRM, I can look at campaigns and see our email campaigns and how they're doing. I can see all of our team members, how they're working, and look at their KPIs all at one place instead of looking at 20 different reports from 20 different software and trying to pull all that data together. Automation and blueprints, I don't even know how many hours a week that saves. The fact that we've automated basically the entire client journey from start to finish. It's a lot. I don't know how many. I say dozens. It's probably more than that. And then of course Zoho projects. I talk about Zoho projects a lot with our content team, but their customization is unequaled in any other project management software that we've used, and it kind of created the blueprint for us to finish a pretty significant content platform or mental health and prevention platform in less than 6 months. And all that time saving, automation, et cetera, has led to 3 years of 150% plus year over year growth. Our renewal rates over the past 3 years have doubled. And our K-12 product went from 36 schools to over 2,000 schools. Our growth is kind of out of this world. We're excited to be kind of on the cusp of it. But the Zoho, I would say, has been a critical piece of our success. The other critical piece to our success is the remote work aspect, that we didn't follow the traditional model, and it allows us to be so flexible that we're able to take advantage of opportunities when they arise. So that's really it as far as my presentation. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions or comments.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, you guys must be the quietest group we have had in the history of doing these customer webinars. So we'll give you some time to go ahead and start pouring the questions in. I'm sure you must have something you want to ask Chris. Going from, what was it, 17 schools, 37 schools to 2,000 in just a few years. That's a pretty amazing story right there. Barry said he is quiet because Chris had amazing content. Their jaws have dropped. They're in awe.
I'm seeing a question from Josh that says, what software do you use for proposals? Great question. So we use the Zoho Finance plugin in the CRM. So we use the estimates portion for proposals, and then we use the invoice portion for invoicing.
Awesome. And then another person had a question about whether you learned how to do all the blueprints and build all the reports by yourself, or whether you contracted that out.
So my background, I worked for a marketing company in the data analytics realm. So the analytics piece was something that I was already familiar with. So I did that myself. As far as blueprints go, I just learned how to do it. I found the drag and drop interface of the Zoho CRM, the blueprint creator, was really easy to use. And we tried subcontracting out some pieces. And every time we did, I found that either the contractor didn't understand my vision, or I didn't convey my vision well enough. And so having myself as the COO who understood the whole process go in and create that blueprint kind of made it how it was supposed to be. So I did it all myself at, and yeah, I felt like that was the right way to do it. For other scripting, so there are some like custom functions and stuff that we use. That kind of real technical stuff we subcontracted out. So we'd say, hey, we want a process that does XYZ. They'd build it, but the overall big picture, the blueprints and stuff, that's stuff I did by myself.
Awesome. So when you went about finding contractors who could do some of that more technical custom work for you, where did you look? How did you go about that? And how did you evaluate whether they were going to be a good partner for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, we just used Upwork, found freelancers, and we would put in that they needed to have Deluge experience and have familiarity with Zoho CRM. And we were able to find, decent people for a decent price. But we only had to do that maybe twice that I can remember in 5 years, because the vast majority of the time I would just submit my question to the Zoho team, and they'd come back with a script for what I needed to do. So, I mean, that'd be my recommendation as the first step before you go try to hire a subcontractor, is just reach out to the Zoho team. They've been great to work with.
Awesome. So there's another question here. Yeah, do you see the one by Robert? Is that what you were going to read?
Yeah. So, how do you calendar with your groups? Shared calendars in Zoho CRM. So we were actually the Google platform before we moved over to Zoho CRM. And so we actually use a combination of Google Calendar, which really seamlessly integrates to Zoho CRM. There's a Google integration. So we use Google Calendar along with Acuity Scheduler. I know Zoho just recently came out with a scheduling tool. We haven't really played around with that. We've been doing Acuity scheduling for like 2.5 years. And that's how we do all of our calendaring, is through a combination of Google, the CRM calendar, and Acuity scheduler.
Yeah, that's something I think when people are evaluating Zoho, sometimes they don't really realize it's like, well, I don't have to, just because Zoho, kind of touts itself as this all-in-one system, you don't have to use every single part of the system. If you're still using a calendar that you like, oftentimes there's an integration you can take advantage of where it can plug into the other Zoho tools you're using in a couple key places. So we do like to kind of play friendly with some of the other vendors, especially like really popular things like, Microsoft Outlook or like Google Calendar, that we know almost every business is probably going to have one of those already.
Yeah, I've found that Zoho is very friendly with other systems, a lot more friendly than say Salesforce was. Like there's an integration for nearly every tool that we wanted to use that's outside of the Zoho platform. So yeah, and that helped the transition immensely, because people could stay on kind of their email, their calendar. We could leave that alone and just transition other parts of our business software.
So, Chris, there's a couple questions that people have asked in the chat area. If you switch to that down at the bottom, there's a question from Clyde and one from Robert that might be good to get to.
All right. So from Robert, I see, hi, I'm challenged to get revenue to deliver excellence, but know that only excellence will please customers. How did you balance that? So that is an excellent question. So there were basically, we had a very sales driven product development roadmap. So where most companies would develop the product and then sell it, we did the opposite. We would sell the product and then develop it. So it's kind of like building the plane while you're flying it. It was, and basically we had to understand that because that's the model that we chose, we knew that there was going to be a market, but there were a lot of early customers that didn't get what you might say excellence, right? Because we were building this plane as we were flying it. But using that customer feedback to create excellence meant that the next customer we got, it was that much better. The product was that much better. We'd solved that other issue that we didn't even know existed. I can think of one instance where we worked with a school district, our first decent sized school district, and we didn't even know that we had to have different levels of administration for teachers, school administrators, district administrators. People who had been in the ed tech world forever probably already knew that. We had to create that. We lost that customer, but the platform we built enabled us to go get that next bigger customer. So it's a great question. It's a tricky balance to, you have to basically be comfortable with the fact that, while 90% retention rates are what you want to get, and the early stages, that might not be what you get, because we're learning from the customers, and sometimes customers are going to get frustrated and leave because of it.
Yeah, so having having the long-term trend of the retention going up is more important than having the high retention rate right out of the gates, right?
Right. It was all about the long term. What are we doing? What is our 5-year vision? Not focusing on, this quarter. Clyde, I'd like to hear more about the common measures of work that you're able to ignore. You brought up clocking in and out, which is being replaced by a result. I could see this really clearing brain space. Are there others of which you are aware? Yeah, I mean, I look at some of the structure, when we bring on a new employee, one of the first questions that I'm always asked is, how early do I have to put in for my vacation days? Or, what if I have a doctor's appointment that I have to take my kid to? What do I do? So some of those kind of really structured, when you're in an office, you have to say, put in for your vacation days 2 weeks in advance, and it has to get put on this calendar, and it counts against your paid time off days, and all of that process. We really don't even think about it. We have a system. I mean, our HR is myself and the CEO. We don't have like a established HR department that evaluates whether you've taken too many days off or you haven't taken enough days off. We really just dispense with those kind of structures, and it's all about results. It's all about, we hired you to do this particular job, and the nuts and bolts of how you go about it, how much time it takes, all of that, we just don't even think about. And so that's kind of the decision we made early on, and all of our employees are on salary, so we can accommodate that. I know if you have to have hourly paid employees, you might have to adjust that, but that's what those are some other examples. Just paid time off, calendar, like when you're going to be there versus not. We communicate those things, but it's not like a static process.
All
You're
right. Thank you.
very welcome.
um, yeah. So another question I wanted to ask is, I guess this is riffing off of Jacques' question. He asked, "Can you discuss Zoho Team a bit more?" So, how did you go about figuring out um, in the beginning? Well, I have these 5 different apps, and now we're looking at this Zoho One thing. How do I figure out which of my existing solutions should I replace, or which ones could I replace? What was that like? Did you talk to people at Zoho to get answers there?
Um, yeah, I mean, we talked to. I'm trying to remember who our initial kind of our sales rep who we talked to. Um, Most of those decisions, though, were really driven by just our internal needs and what we felt like were the biggest gaps in our products. Zoho does a great job of making their products accessible and easy to use. So you don't necessarily need to bring in the Zoho team for most of those decisions. You can really kind of look at the suite and be like, oh, that makes sense for this, and this makes sense for that. Um, yeah, I think most of those decisions were really just driven by our internal needs. We said we needed a CRM first, we need a project management tool second, and we need a messaging platform, and those just happened to be in Zoho One, and so it really worked out pretty easily.
Yeah. So another thing I was thinking about is like with that blueprint, for example. I know that that's something some organizations I feel like they kind of struggle with taking like, okay, we have this process which we kind of go through in our day-to-day work, and now we have this great tool like a CRM where we can automate some of this away and save a bunch of time. But I think the point that a lot of people can get hung up on is getting everyone to agree on what the actual process is. At some organizations, you'd be amazed at the disagreements that come up. And then just, how do I translate this process into something that's automated? Which parts do I want to automate and which parts should never be automated because it should always have more of a personal touch over it? So do you want to maybe speak to that? And then I think that might be the last question, unless we get like one more good one in there.
Yeah, that's honestly, that process of mapping out the processes is probably the best thing you can do for your business, especially in the early stages. And having those arguments and those conversations of, no, I don't want it to do this, or I do want it to do this. That's one of going through that blueprint process where we looped in the sales team and we looped in the client services team, and we sat down and we said, what do we want this journey to look like, was probably one of the best things we ever did for the business. As far as what you want to automate versus what you don't want to automate, pretty easy rule of thumb is, if a trained monkey could do it, automate it. If it's a repetitive task, automate it. If it's something that takes a human being and empathy and maybe an emotional response, if you're trying to do something else, don't automate it. So, for example, our sales presentation, while we could create like a video, like a canned video for our sales presentation, we chose not to do that because what we wanted was the adaptability. So, our sales presentation is done manually every single time, but calendaring, so having a client schedule a meeting with us, is all done automatically because that doesn't take any brain power to do. And so we created a system where they can just pick their time, have the webinar scheduled automatically. So that's probably a good rule of thumb, is I always think of the trained monkey. If they could do it, then it should be automated.
All right. Yeah, thank you. And then one last question here. Josh wanted to know, do you ever get people who don't accept a job offer because it's a remote position?
Actually, no. I've never had that in the last 5 years that we've worked remotely. It's usually the other way around. People apply because it's a remote position, or in some cases will even take like a salary decrease because it's a remote position over what they were doing before. I've never had an experience where somebody's like, no, I don't think I can work remotely. But that could be a factor that we advertise everything as. This is, bold letters up at the top of the job post. This is a remote position. So we really just get the people who already want it. So sorry, I couldn't be more helpful there, but I've never had that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. So up on this slide, in case you guys were interested, we put a link to Evolution Labs website. There's also Chris's email if you want to reach out to him, and his LinkedIn if you want to go and connect. And I can put that back up in case anyone wants me to go back. But then also, there will be a short survey after this ends, so please fill it out. Let us know your feedback. It's always really helpful. Yeah, thank you for putting that back up. And then also, if you have questions for the Zoho team, you can email us at webinars@zoho1.com. And you can follow Zoho One on Twitter. The handle is just at Zoho One, 2 O's in a row. So thank you all for attending. It's been great having this session with all of you, and good questions. We got people from England. Wow. Okay, goodbye, Robert. And we got people from Canada, from the US. I'm sure there was even more countries represented who maybe didn't say anything. But anyways, thank you all. Goodbye, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.